Coming up on this Wednesday edition of Newsline at noon, Japan's latest stimulus measures that have further weakened the yen are dealing a huge blow to the price competitiveness of Korea's exporters. The Republicans appear to be en route to securing control of the Senate as results start to trickle in from the midterm elections in the United States. Plus, local financial institutions forecast a gloomy 2015 for Korea's main stock market as profits drop amid the slowing economic recovery. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
It's noon Wednesday, November 5th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in live from Seoul. I'm Eoh Jin-joo.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broome. Our top story this afternoon, Korean exporters are feeling the heat after the Bank of Japan's decision late last week to flood the Japanese economy with cash. And this sent the yen plunging to a 6-year low against the Korean won.
Right, the situation is taking a heavy toll on Korean companies as the weak yen is taking great bites out of their price competitiveness on the international market. Park Ji-won reports.
The Bank of Japan's announcement of expanded monetary stimulus measures last Friday, worth trillions of yen, sent the stock prices of Korea's largest automakers, Hyundai and Kia Motors, slipping by more than 5% on Monday. Additional drops were recorded Tuesday, stripping Hyundai of its staunch second-place position in terms of market capitalization in Korea. Analysts say the fall is largely due to negative expectations that the Korean auto giant will not be able to keep up profitability and stay competitive against its Japanese counterparts.
Taking advantage of enhanced profits due to the weakening yen, Honda and Toyota have been focusing on technological improvements to their vehicles, like boosting fuel efficiency. Korea should keep in mind that the weakening yen will make them more competitive in terms of price and quality of products.
The effects of the weakening yen is not only hitting Korea's big conglomerates, but also sending strong shockwaves to smaller companies. 3 years ago, the yen was trading at more than 1,500 won per 100 yen, but now stands at around 950 won per 100 yen, meaning a 40% decrease in export revenues. According to the Korea Federation of SMEs, the break-even point for a small and medium-sized exporter is 1,014 won per 100 yen. The current 1 yen exchange rate falls way below that.
If the exchange rate falls to around 951 per 100 yen, Korea's export volume will decrease 4.2% and down to 8.8% if the rate falls to 900.
Around half of Korea's top 100 exports fiercely compete with Japanese products, but as the yen weakened with no immediate end in sight, bleak forecasts are weighing heavy on Korea's main exporters. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Now, it's fair to say trade between Korea and Japan has seen better days. New figures show bilateral trade volume has been shrinking for nearly 3 years now. And of course, the weakening Japanese yen against the Korean won has played a significant role in the contraction. But exchange rates haven't been the only reason behind the lagging trade, as our Song Ji-san reports.
The weak Japanese yen is taking a toll on bilateral trade between Korea and Japan. According to the Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency, exports and imports to and from Japan have been on a steady decline since 2012, as with the third quarter of this year. It marks the first time that bilateral trade between Seoul and Tokyo has posted negative growth for 3 consecutive years. For Tokyo, the weak yen reduces the need to import Korean-made goods, which have in turn lost their price competitiveness. Added to that is the low domestic sentiment here in Seoul that has led companies to reduce their facilities investment, with imports of machinery and industrial electronics products from Japan dropping more than 20% this year. Tokyo's increased foreign direct investment in Seoul also plays a role in the reduction of imports. Japanese companies account for 28% of all foreign companies in Korea, the highest portion for any country. Besides the weak yen, bilateral tensions between Seoul and Tokyo over historical and territorial issues are also hindering trade. Japan is Korea's third largest trade partner after China and the United States, at a trade volume of $95 billion last year. 송지선, Arirang News.
Now, the 1 to yen exchange rate may be causing headaches for the nation's exporters, but there's one industry that's enjoying the opposite experience. According to the tourism industry, Hana Tour, one of the nation's biggest travel agencies, saw the number of Korean tourists to Japan in October jump over 120% from a year earlier. Interpark saw its customers to Japan soar nearly 200% during the same period. Now, travel to Japan had been on a downward spiral following the Fukushima nuclear disaster in 2011, but analysts say recent demand has been driven by the weak yen. The Japanese government also amended the country's duty-free system last month to lure more tourists. Hana Tour officials say with a weakening trend of the yen likely to continue, more Koreans will make the short hop to Japan, especially during the winter.
Now, Korea's foreign exchange reserves dropped for the third consecutive month in October, marking the first time the figure has decreased for more than 3 months in a row since the global financial crisis in 2008. The Bank of Korea said on Wednesday that the country's foreign exchange reserves amounted to $363.7 billion as of the end of October. That's down $680 million from the previous month. The central bank attributed the decline to the weakening of the euro and the British pound against the greenback. Now, a low earnings report from Samsung Electronics in the third quarter has had quite the ripple effect that has even encouraged local security firms to come out and downgrade their forecasts for lots of other firms on the main stock market here in Korea. And they say that the impact is likely to carry on well into next year. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
One by one, local securities firms are lowering their projections for Korean shares next year, citing a lack of growth momentum in the domestic economy. Kyobo Securities Company points to a faster than expected slump in exports as one of the main reasons, citing an earnings shock from Samsung Electronics in the third quarter of this year.
There is no growth engine to supplement the low earnings performance of Samsung Electronics. The country's automobile sector isn't likely to improve anytime soon, either due to low global demand, and this will spill over to Korean shares next year.
The analyst adds the shares may fluctuate within a wide margin as the Korean economy undergoes structural reforms. Projections for this year's main benchmark Kospi aren't all that bright either, as the gap between Korean shares and global shares are widening. The Kospi fell nearly 4% from the start of the year, the steepest drop among Asian countries. In contrast, the Dow Jones reached an all-time high, rising nearly 5% over the same period, while Japan's Nikkei inched up 3.5% on the back of Tokyo's expansionary monetary policies. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, more bad news for Samsung Electronics because the profitability gap between it and Apple has widened quite a lot. Korea's Hana Daetu Securities says Samsung Electronics recorded an operating profit margin of just 7% in the third quarter. That is far below Apple's 27%. And a steep drop from the 20% mark Samsung recorded in the first 3 months of the year. The Korean tech giant has been lagging behind Apple in terms of profitability, in fact, all the way since 2011. And considering the popularity of Apple's latest smartphone models, the iPhone 6 and iPhone 6 Plus, experts predict the US company will put even more distance between itself and Samsung in the fourth quarter.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea. Connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on NEWSLINE at Noon with Mark Broome and Eoh Jin-joo.
I'm Eoh Jin-joo with
Market researcher, strategy analytics, said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about...
Counting is well underway for the 2014 U.S. midterm elections. Several Senate seats have already been called one way or the other, and a dramatic political power shift appears to be taking place in Washington as exit polls are showing a momentum in the Republicans' favor. So far, out of the 6 seats needed to claim a majority in the Senate, the Republicans have gained 3, one in West Virginia, one in Arkansas, and the other from South Dakota. Connie Lee has more.
The polls are now closed and Americans have spoken. Tens of millions turned out to cast their ballots in the midterm elections on Tuesday, and it looks like Republicans will make major gains. One of the first victories of the night was Republican leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell of Kentucky. Seen here, casting his vote earlier in the day, McConnell has been re-elected, making him the Senate's majority leader. However, the first gain for the Republicans came from Shelley Moore Capito, who won the Senate seat for West Virginia. Exit polls are showing momentum, moving in the Republicans' favor, as they only need to pick up 6 extra seats to claim the Senate. And if they do, it'll be the first time in 8 years and give Republicans control of both chambers of Congress. U.S. voters know the midterms will have a huge impact on the political future of the country.
It's a turning point as to which way the government goes and as to who controls the House and Senate. And it's important to me. I think it's important to everybody.
Analysts have been predicting a Republican victory as President Barack Obama's approval ratings have fallen to the lowest point of his administration. According to the latest Gallup poll, Obama's approval rate was only 42%, with 53% disapproving of his job as president. In early exit poll results, about half of all voters said the economy was the most important issue at this election, with most voters displeased with both parties for not being able to cooperate in Washington. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
America's top diplomat has once again asked for China's help in getting North Korea to give up its nuclear program, saying support is not only wanted but necessary. Pyongyang, meanwhile, on the same day said it has no interest in discussing the matter with the U.S. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says he hopes to work closely with China to make North Korea realize that its current path only leads to a dead end. In a speech at Johns Hopkins University on Tuesday, Kerry said North Korea will only realize security and prosperity when it gives up its nuclear program. The U.S. diplomat also stressed the importance of cooperation with China on non-proliferation. Last week, Kerry praised Beijing for putting pressure on the North by putting limitations on trade going into the country. China is North Korea's last remaining major ally and a key provider of food and fuel supplies. Kerry is scheduled to visit China this week for a range of multi- and bilateral meetings, a week ahead of President Barack Obama's visit to Beijing for the APEC Leaders Summit. Kerry's comments come as North Korea ruled out holding talks with the United States regarding either its human rights or nuclear issues. A spokesperson from the North's Foreign Ministry said Tuesday Pyongyang would not discuss such topics with enemies that aim to topple the regime, adding it's only willing to speak with countries that respect its sovereign rights. Watchers say the official statement linking human rights and nuclear issues could be an attempt to influence Washington ahead of a possible UN General Assembly vote on a resolution against North Korea's human rights abuses. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
South Korea's unification minister has criticized North Korea for backing out of a second round of high-level talks, saying Pyongyang's attitude has broken the faith of inter-Korean agreements. Meeting with dozens of foreign ambassadors in Seoul on Tuesday, Ryu Gil-jae stressed the importance of sticking to commitments to break the vicious cycle of mutual mistrust. He also urged the North to take part in talks without preconditions. The two Koreas agreed to meet for high-level talks in late October or early November, but the North canceled them over the flying of anti-Pyongyang leaflets by South Korean activists across the border. And moving on, the White House says President Barack Obama will meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping when he visits Beijing next week for the APEC summit. At the center of the discussion will be how to shape the new model of relations between the two superpowers and how to deal with North Korea's nuclear threat. Hwang Seung-hee has the details.
In their first major meeting since the Sunnyland Summit in June last year, Presidents Barack Obama and Xi Jinping are expected to try and answer a tough question. What will the relationship of their nations look like in the future? The White House says Obama will hold bilateral talks with his Chinese counterpart next Wednesday in Beijing on the sidelines of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. President Xi wants a new model of great power relations in which Beijing will have a bigger say in the region. China has been taking strides by escalating maritime confrontations, launching new diplomatic initiatives like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and toughening its position on issues like cybersecurity. While Washington has resisted such ambitions, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry stressed the importance of getting the relationship right.
The U.S.-China relationship is the most consequential in the world today, period. And it will do much to determine the shape of the 21st century. That means that we have to get it right.
The two leaders will also discuss regional and global issues ranging from North Korea's nuclear program, the Ebola outbreak, pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong, and China's territorial dispute with Japan in the South China Sea. President Obama's six-day, three-nation trip also takes him to Burma and Australia. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
Now, back here in Korea, and pension reform is the hot topic on the last day of a parliamentary questioning session at the National Assembly on this Wednesday. But if the opposition is going to get along with the ruling party's plans to try and overhaul this huge system, they want something in return. Our Ji Myung-gil has the details.
The ruling Saenuri Party may be ready to make a deal to make sure its plans to overhaul the nation's pension scheme for public servants passes through. Pundits believe the ruling and opposition parties are working on a closed-door agreement that gives each side a concession to make it happen. The ruling party would gain support for its pension reform plans, while the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy would get a parliamentary investigation into the Full Major Rivers project, a green growth project launched under the previous Lee Myung-bak administration. Environmental activists have long been critical of the $20 billion project, claiming that it has seriously harmed water quality and river ecosystems. The opposition has said it would only consent to the pension reform bill after a social consensus is reached, but the party has said that modifying the pension system is needed for fiscal sustainability. The parliamentary bill would seek to rein in the pension system that would require some $46 billion in taxpayer money over the next 10 years. The governing Saenuri Party says all pending bills, including the pension reform bill, could be up for discussion, raising hopes that a bipartisan deal may be reached soon. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
The government is warning that Korea's low birth rate and aging society will start putting the country's finances under a great deal of strain in the decades to come unless there are significant tax hikes. According to a report by the National Assembly Budget Office, the national debt would amount to $13.5 trillion by 2060 if there are no additional tax rate increases. That's nearly 1.7 times larger than the country's expected GDP in the year 2060, meaning each citizen's share of this debt would be around $300,000. The report adds the government may not be able to repay its debt through state bonds starting from the year 2033. The number of registered vehicles in Korea has exceeded the 20 million mark for the first time ever, with the number of vehicles on the road here in Korea doubling in the space of only 17 years. The nation's transport ministry says that as of the end of last month, Korea became the world's 15th and Asia's 4th nation to surpass the 20 million mark. China has the most registered vehicles in Asia, followed by India, Japan and then Korea. The Korean government has been collecting related data since 1945, and it took 52 years for Korea to exceed the 10 million mark. Ministry officials say the growth in the number of registered vehicles reflects the size and importance of the country's automobile market. Right, well, let's get a check on some of the other global headlines we're following at this hour with Eunice Kim standing by at the news center.
Eunice, let's begin with the situation about the Ebola outbreak. A survey in the U.S. has shown an overwhelming majority of Americans support a quarantine of medical volunteers returning from West Africa.
Right, Jin-joo. We're talking about a recent Reuters Ipsos poll conducted through Monday. It showed that nearly 75% of the almost 1,700 people surveyed supported a quarantine, though the online poll did not specify whether it should be a mandatory or voluntary isolation. 80% said the movements of healthcare workers should be controlled. This, of course, as the states of New Jersey and New York have implemented a broad screening measure that requires anyone who had contact with Ebola patients in West Africa to isolate themselves for 21 daes, whether or not they show symptoms. Meanwhile, in West Africa, the latest update by the World Health Organization showed that all districts in Liberia and Sierra Leone continue to report new cases of the deadly virus, though the number of deaths have remained under 5,000. This, as the Associated Press reports, the Ebola outbreak is creating an emergency within an emergency, as other infections in Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea from diseases such as malaria and pneumonia are falling under the radar because the people are wary of going to a clinic or simply unable to find one that's open. In other news, Thai police say they have arrested the co-founder of Pirate Bay as he was attempting to cross into Thailand from Laos. Known to hackers as Tiamo, the 36-year-old was on the run while out on bail following a conviction in a Swedish court for aiding copyright infringement 5 years ago. Frederick Ney helped start the file-sharing website, which links users to pirated content on the internet. The usually tranquil country of Switzerland has been rocked by a pair of shootings that have left 5 people dead. 3 bodies were found on Monday in the Alps town of Winterschwil that was characterized by local media as a crime of passion. Bern police said the shooter was one of the 2 men who died. The third person killed near a train station was a woman. Hours later, in an apparently unrelated incident, another woman was shot dead in an apartment in the northern city of Basel. The regional public prosecutor's office said the suspect is believed to have moved on to shoot a man and another woman in a nearby flat before being arrested that night. Finally, in a rare move for the reclusive state, North Korea has hosted its first fine art exhibit at its embassy in Britain. The Telegraph reports Pyongyang sent a group of 4 artists to London to capture scenes of the city over a period of 2 days. It said the men came from the country's elite Mansudae Studio, an artist collective tasked with creating portraits of leader Kim Jong-un and his family. The exhibit, initiated by a UK-based art historian, is open to the public from Tuesday through Friday of this week.
Good afternoon. Unlike the chilly morning, we can look forward to a calm and nice afternoon with milder highs in the upper teens and 20s in many areas. And we're looking at clear blue skies at this hour. By heading towards midday, some clouds will be moving in. And it's been really dry lately, and a dry weather advisory remains in effect here in the capital, so be extra cautious when handling fires. With that in mind, here are the readings for today. Now, the daytime high in the capital and Daegu will top out at 19, while Gwangju and Busan will climb up to 18 and 20 this afternoon. And for other regions, Jeju Island will be getting up to 18 later on, and Daejeon and Dokdo will see highs of 17. And it seems like lots of clouds will be rolling in at the end of the week, with the showers expected for the southern provinces, but here in Seoul will remain dry with highs hovering in the mid-teens. Well, that's all for Korea, and here's international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Have a great day. Mark and I'll be back at the same time on Thursday.
Until then, goodbye.